US President Joe Biden is heading to Europe ahead of a NATO summit after several allies questioned his decision to send cluster bombs to Ukraine. The UK and Canada are among those who voiced concern about supplying the bombs, which are widely banned because of the danger they pose to civilians. The US says they are needed because Ukraine's weapon stocks are dwindling. Mr. Biden will arrive first in the UK on Sunday evening before heading to Lithuania for this week's NATO summit. On Monday, he will meet Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to discuss various issues, including the war in Ukraine. He will also meet King Charles. On Monday, the first time the pair have met since the king was crowned. The U.S. confirmed it was sending cluster bombs to the Ukraine on Friday as part of a military aid package worth $800 on 2626. Mr. Biden said it had been a very difficult decision, but that he had eventually acted because the Ukrainians are running out of ammunition. But a number of NATO allies quickly distanced themselves from the decision. Mr. Sunak did not directly criticize his US counterpart, but made clear that the UK was one of 123 countries that had signed up to the Convention on Cluster Munitions, which bans the production or use of the weapons. Canada, New Zealand, and Spain, all NATO members, like the US and UK, also stated their opposition to the weapons. No to cluster bombs and yes to the legitimate defense of Ukraine, which we understand should not be carried out with cluster bombs, Spain's Defense Minister Margarita Robles said. But Germany, another signatory of the treaty and NATO member, said that while it would not provide such weapons to Ukraine, it understood the American position. We're certain that our US friends didn't take the decision about supplying such ammunition lightly. German government spokesman Stefan Hebestreit told reporters in Berlin, cluster bombs typically release lots of smaller bomblets that can kill indiscriminately over a wide area. One of the concerns surrounding their supply is their failure, or rate. Unexploded bomblets can linger on the ground for years and then indiscriminately detonate. Ukraine has promised the weapons will not be used in civilian areas and will monitor and report on their use, but Russia dismissed these assurances as not worth anything. Mr. Biden's visit to the UK comes a month after the two countries signed the so-called Atlantic Declaration, agreement designed to strengthen cooperation between the countries. Aside from the war in Ukraine, it is also expected Mr. Biden will seek further support from Mr. Sunak to help broker a deal with Turkey, which is currently opposed to Sweden joining NATO. This, alongside the divisions over Ukraine's membership, will be among a number of other issues that will be discussed during the organization's two-day meeting in the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has just concluded a 4-day trip to China aimed at rebuilding bridges between the two countries. Was the trip to Beijing a success? Well, by one very basic metric, yes. The U.S. and China are once again talking to each other face-to-face politely and respectfully, if not warmly. It's a stark contrast to trans-Pacific communication during the Donald Trump administration, which was done largely via the megaphone of social media. The tone and the content from both sides is more positive and more measured. Ms. Yellen said her trip would help to build a resilient and productive channel of communication with China's new economic team. That should not be discounted. In March this year, much of the top tier of China's government was replaced with men whose primary qualification is loyalty to leader Xi Jinping. Key among them is the country's new economic chief, He Lifeng. On Saturday, Janet Yellen spent much of the day with Mr. He. She said their talks had been direct, substantive, and productive, while admitting that the two sides had significant disagreements. Throughout her visit, Mrs. Yellen sought to persuade her Chinese host that under President Joe Biden, America is not fundamentally hostile to China. We do not see our relationship in terms of great power conflict, she said, and we do not seek to decouple our economies from each other. It appears the Biden administration is trying to demonstrate that its China policy is not simply a continuation of the Trump administration's open hostility to Beijing. Did she succeed? We are still waiting to hear from the Chinese side, but as the saying goes, actions speak louder than words. And from Beijing's perspective, some recent actions of the Biden administration are anything but friendly. Key among them is the imposition of export controls on certain U.S. microchips that are used in the development of artificial intelligence. Far from being eased, the U.S. is now moving to widen those restrictions to other high-tech exports to China while leaning hard on its allies, from Japan to Germany, to the Netherlands not to supply China with the means to make the most cutting-edge microchips. America's motivation is simple. It doesn't want China to have easy access to American technologies that could give it an edge in things like AI, and in military technologies that could one day be used against the US in a future conflict over, for example, Taiwan. All of this means that while dialogue has reopened and looks set to accelerate in the coming months, the process is delicate. Progress made in the last few days could very easily be knocked back by another spy balloon incident or a close call between us and Chinese naval ships or aircraft.